In 1965, the best-selling non-Cadillac luxury car in America wasn't a Lincoln. It wasn't an Imperial. It wasn't even close. It was a Buick. Buick sold 77,200 Electra 225s that year. Lincoln, the entire Continental lineup, moved 36,824 cars. Imperial, Chrysler's standalone luxury marque, the one built to go toe-to-toe with Cadillac, sold 18,409. The Chrysler 300, the letter car, the one every enthusiast today can name on sight, 11,621 units. Add Lincoln, Imperial, and the 300 together, and Buick still beat them, by a lot. So here's the question this video is going to answer. If the Electra 225 was that dominant, why does almost nobody talk about it today? Why do car shows spend hours on the Continental and Imperial and barely mention the car that actually outsold them both combined? This is a story of the best-selling American luxury car of 1965 and how it quietly disappeared from the record. To understand why the Electra's numbers make sense, you have to understand something modern audiences have mostly lost. General Motors used to run a strict, deliberate ladder of prestige, and Buick was not a discount brand sitting near the bottom of it. It was the second highest rung, right below Cadillac, and for a huge portion of upper middle class and upper class America, it was the more sensible choice. Cadillac was for people who wanted the world to know they'd arrived. Buick was for people who had already arrived and didn't feel the need to announce it quite so loudly. Doctors, judges, bank presidents, successful small business owners, the country club set one tier below the industrialists, a huge number of them drove Buicks, and specifically, if they wanted the top of the range, they drove Electras. This wasn't an accident of branding. GM spent 30 decades building that hierarchy on purpose. Chevrolet, Pontiac, Oldsmobile, Buick, Cadillac, each one a deliberate step up in price and prestige, each one designed to catch a customer as their income grew and keep them inside the GM family for life. By the mid-1960s, that ladder was working better than it had ever worked, and the Electra 225 sat right at the top of Buick's end of it, a full-size flagship that was, in every meaningful way except the badge, cross-shopped against Lincoln and Imperial rather than against other Buicks. That's the part that's been lost. The Electra wasn't competing with Oldsmobile's 98, it was competing with the Continental. And in 1965, it won. 1965 wasn't just a good year for the Electra, it was the year everything lined up. GM had completely restyled its full-size lineup for 1965, moving to a new perimeter frame chassis that transformed how these cars rode and handled compared to the stiffer, choppier full-size cars of the early 60s. The Electra 225 got a longer, lower, more sculpted body. The kind of clean, confident, unmistakably American design language that defines the mid-60s for most people who picture the era at all. Long hood, formal roofline on the sedans, a wide street presence that photographed like money without shouting about it. The 225 in the name, incidentally, referred to the car's overall length in inches, 225 inches, nearly 19 feet of Buick, and Buick made sure you knew it. It was marketing built entirely around scale and presence, at a moment when scale and presence were exactly what a certain kind of successful American wanted from a car. Underneath that sheet metal sat the 401 cubic inch V8, the engine enthusiasts still call the nailhead, thanks to its unusually small, vertically oriented valves. On paper, it wasn't the most sophisticated engine in Detroit. In practice, it delivered exactly what an Electra buyer wanted. Enormous, effortless, low-end torque. This wasn't an engine built to rev and impress at a stoplight. It was built to get a 2.5-ton luxury sedan up to highway speed without any drama at all, and to sit there at 70 miles an hour feeling like it was barely working. That character, quiet, torquey, unhurried, was the whole point. It matched the customer. Combine the new body, the new chassis, and an engine with a genuine reputation for effortless power, and you get a car that in 1965 specifically represented Buick at its absolute peak of design and engineering confidence. That's why this particular year, more than 64 or 66, is the one worth talking about. Here's where the Electra story gets interesting, because the buyer wasn't chasing status in the way we usually assume luxury car buyers were. Cadillac buyers in 1965 were often buying the car specifically because everyone would recognize it as a Cadillac. Imperial buyers, a much smaller, more idiosyncratic group, were often serious Mopar loyalists, making a deliberate statement against Cadillac and Lincoln conformity. Lincoln buyers were frequently buying into the Kennedy-era prestige the Continental had earned as the presidential limousine of choice. Electra buyers were different. They were, disproportionately, repeat GM customers who had worked their way up the ladder. Someone who'd owned the Pontiac in the 50s, an Oldsmobile in the early 60s, and now, with a bit more money and a bit more seniority, an Electra. They were people for whom the car needed to signal comfort and arrival to their own social circle, not to strangers on the highway. A Buick Electra told your neighbors, your golf partners, and your church congregation that you were doing well. It didn't need to tell anyone else anything. That's a fundamentally quieter kind of prestige than what Cadillac was selling, and it's also, frankly, a less cinematic story. Nobody makes a movie about the guy who bought the sensible, comfortable, successful adjacent luxury. They make movies about the guy who bought the Cadillac. That's the first thread pulling at why this car got erased, but it's not the whole story, and we'll get to the rest. Let's put the actual sales data in front of you, because this is the number that should end any argument about whether the Electra mattered in 1965. 1965 Buick Electra 225, 77,200 units. 1965 Lincoln Continental, 36,824 units. 1965 Imperial, 18,409 units. 1965 Chrysler 300 Series, 11,621 units. Look at that again. Buick's 5 flagship outsold Lincoln's entire lineup by more than 2-to-1. It outsold Imperial by well over 4-to-1. And it outsold the legendary Chrysler 300, the car that shows up in nearly every greatest American cars of the 60s list, by a factor of nearly 7. Even if you add Lincoln, Imperial, and the 300 together, you get 66,854 cars. The Electra 225 alone still beats that combined total by over 10,000. This is documented, verifiable production data, the kind found in Ward's Automotive Yearbook in 1965 and confirmed against GM's own Heritage Center production records. It's not a rounding trick or a favorable comparison. By raw volume, the Buick Electra 225 was the most successful non-Cadillac luxury car in America in 1965, and it wasn't particularly close. And this is where it gets almost absurd. Period reviewers noticed. Consumer Reports' 1965 luxury car comparison placed the Electra directly in the conversation with Lincoln and Imperial on ride quality and refinement, not as an also-ran, but as a legitimate rival. At the time, nobody was confused about what the Electra was. The confusion came later. So how does a car with those numbers vanish from the popular memory of an era that people otherwise obsess over? A few things happened at once. First, Buick's own identity drifted. Through the 70s and 80s, Buick increasingly became associated with a much older, more conservative buyer, the brand that, fairly or not, picked up a reputation as your grandfather's car. That later identity retroactively colored how people remembered the 60s Buicks too, even though the 1965 Electra buyer looked nothing like the stereotype that came to define the brand 20 years later. Second, the collector car world built its mythology around specific, marketable icons. Muscle cars, the Continental's Kennedy connection, the Imperial's cult rarity, and full-size luxury sedans without a celebrity story attached simply didn't get the same magazine ink, the same auction spotlight, the same nostalgia marketing. A car doesn't need to have been rare or unsuccessful to get forgotten. It just needs to lack a hook that keeps getting repeated. Third, and maybe most simply, success without spectacle doesn't generate stories. Nobody tells a story of the car that quietly outsold everyone. They tell the story of the car that was rare or scandalous or drove a president. The Electra's whole appeal, comfort, competence, quiet confidence, is exactly the kind of appeal that doesn't survive 50 years of retelling. Here's the twist though. Collectors are starting to catch up to the data. Well-documented, well-preserved 1965 Electra 225s are now trading in the $22,000 to $45,000 range, depending on body style, condition, and originality, with the convertibles and the cleanest documented hardtops sitting at the top of that band. That's not muscle car money, but it's a meaningful and rising figure for a full-size luxury sedan that most people assumed was worth a fraction of that just a decade ago. Slowly, the record is correcting itself. The people buying these cars today aren't chasing hype. They're buying the actual best-selling non-Cadillac luxury car of 1965, a fact that's sitting in the primary sources the whole time, in Ward's yearbook, in GM's own production ledgers, in the Buick Historical Collection annals at the Flint Public Library for anyone who bothered to look.
The 1965 Buick Electra 225 didn't fail. It didn't get outsold, outclassed, or forgotten because it deserved to be. It got outsold by nothing in its class that year, and it got forgotten anyway, because history remembers spectacle, and the Electra's entire identity was built on not needing any. 77,000 American families didn't choose Lincoln, they didn't choose Imperial, they chose this car. It's time it got remembered as what it actually was, the most successful luxury car in America that wasn't a Cadillac. If this is the kind of automotive history you actually want, the stuff with real production numbers behind it instead of just recycled folklore, subscribe, because there are a lot more of these forgotten cars worth setting their record straight on. And if you've got a car you think deserves this treatment, drop it in the comments. I read every one, and a lot of these episodes start exactly that way.